Hey, everybody, welcome back in. It is a brand new edition of the Fantasy Football Hustle. I am Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined as always by my main man, the analytical assassin, Dwayne McFarland of Establish the Run. Dwayne, how you doing, my friend?
Man, I'm doing good. How about you, Drake?
I'm in New York. I'm up north a little bit. I'm not in the city. I'm in Syracuse, so I'm hours away. But, you know, we hope everybody out there is safe. You're having fun. You're enjoying yourself at home. Get to know your family. You know, you're hanging out with your kids. Get off your phone. Chill with them. I hope people look back after this is all done and they say, like, I really took something from this time at home and I got to know my wife and kids a little better. And we had some fun, you know, going for 58 walks a day. But, you know, that's what we do here. So this is the Fantasy Football Hustle. Murderer's Row continues tonight, as someone pointed out to me on Twitter, because we just keep bringing up these guests. I don't know how we get them. We're not paying these guys. We don't have any, salacious photos of them anywhere, but we're going to keep dropping that flavor in your ear with our man, Lord Reeves. I can't believe I went Rich today and I texted one of the guys I work with and I go, hey, we got Rich Hribar coming on the show today. He goes, and I sent you the screenshot. He's like, holy shit, that guy's a big deal. Like, where can I watch this show? So welcome in, everybody. Rich Hribar, sharpfootballanalysis.com, author of The Worksheet. It comes out every Wednesday during the season and has really become a staple in the industry. Thanks for joining us, and welcome into the hustle.
Yeah, listen, I immediately showed my wife that text that you sent, and I said, listen, Brian in New York, who I've never met's friend, really says I'm a big deal. What do you think about this? She did not care. She was not impressed at any level. So I mean, I'll take anything I can get. But I mean, listen, this is you guys, man. You guys said what you guys are getting, the people you're getting to draw in. That's a testament to the work you guys are doing. I love following you guys, and the last past year and a half. Especially following Dwayne and the stuff he's putting out. Not to discredit you at any level, Brian, but Dwayne.
My wife does it all the time. I'm used to it.
Yeah. I mean, Dwayne, he's got Context Matters, as his Twitter handle. And if you look at my bio on Twitter, the first line is connoisseur of context. So I mean, yeah. This is my wheelhouse. So I mean, I love it. All the interactions I've had with Dwayne, I've appreciated the work he's put out, and the work you guys have done on the show. So I mean, I'm excited to join you guys. When you guys reached out, I said, oh yeah, absolutely. We're all stuck in, like you said, getting to enjoy our families and and our spouses. I'm riding on almost 13 years here. So, I mean, we're kind of rekindling and say, oh, yeah, this is why we love each other, because we can get through a moment like this. We get through tough times and realize that, yeah, like we have to spend every hour with each other. It's all right. We'll make it happen. So, yeah, I mean, I hope everyone else is doing well during these times. It's kind of a weird space that we're in. And, hopefully we're going to pull out of it here in the upcoming months, and hopefully that when we get out of it, we'll have some NFL football to get us all through.
Hopefully. So everybody, while you're hanging out at home, we appreciate it. So crack a beer, hang out with the hustle. We're going to talk a little best ball tonight.
Already cracked it.
Oh, there you go.
I actually stopped drinking beer, so I got some Jameson for you guys. But I stopped drinking beer like a couple months ago.
Any specific reason, or is it the calories or the taste? Or
honestly, man, I was starting to feel worse. Like when I would get like a beer buzz, like a beer hangover, it started to become like my worst hangover, and so I just put it on pause for a little bit, see what happens.
I don't blame you. I've noticed myself.
I think it's the craft beer, man. Like I started drinking a lot of craft beer, and it's not like when you just like are drinking Bud Light in the yard and you're playing cornhole or outside shooting hoops or something. The craft beer started to catch up to me, I think.
Yeah, after 6 double IPAs, and then that's the best time. Put the phone down if you're on Twitter and you're like, oh man, this double IPA 6-pack was really good. And you're like, let me start spouting off some political tweets here real quick. 2 a.m. But so yeah, we're gonna hit some best ball topics. Rich did a really nice couple of articles over at Sharp Football Analysis on player comps for the rookies coming in this year. And you're in a big time league with kind of the who's who of fantasy football. There was a massive trade that went down. You were involved with a hit on that. And maybe if we have some time, Tom Brady was on Howard Stern today. And I know you mentioned a little on that. I'm a huge Howard Stern fan. So maybe we'll get into some of that. But let's dive in right now. It is best ball season. Basically, the two best places you're going to play are at Fanball and at the FFPC. Your articles are based on those two sites. If anybody doesn't know the main difference between the two. Fanball is a 20-man roster. The FFPC is a 28-man roster. The starting requirements vary a little bit with a flex, and you get tight end premium in the FFPC. Go over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. Rich's work is all there. That's kind of what we're going to base some of these things off. So let's start at the quarterback position. And I'm actually doing a best ball draft as we speak. There's a lot of guys out there who listen to our show and they're in home leagues, and they kind of might say, hey, I want to go out and I want to get Lamar Jackson. This is a best ball league. I want Patty Mahomes. How early should somebody be eyeing one of those elite quarterbacks? And has your research showed that it makes sense to take one of these quarterbacks early?
Yeah, so the research I did for the articles was the past 3 years on my fantasy league, Fanball Best Ball 10s, the past 2 years at FFPC, non-super flex leagues. So, you're not getting that quarterback weight in those super flex leagues. But, on Fanball, just some like bullet points. I mean, teams taking their QB1 prior to the 5th round have had just a 4.5% win rate. Now, remember, just entering one of these leagues, you inherently should start with an 8.3% win rate, just signing up. That's like a baseline win rate. But so 4.5% win rate for teams taking their quarterback before the 5th round, and the QB1 always goes before that round. So you don't want to be that guy, getting in on last year's flavor. Just like your regular real drafts. JJ Zacharyson was ahead of his time, and there's a reason why it exists, and it applies to these best ball leagues as well. And then you look at teams taking their first quarterback in the 7th round and prior have just had a 4.9% win rate. So you kind of don't want to get in on that top tier quarterback. You kind of want to be in that middle range, and you kind of want to strike in that mid tier range. But then you also, what the mistake a lot of people make in these best ball leagues is they either take 2 or 3 quarterbacks, but they take their either backup or their 2 backups way late. But that's just not the way to play it. You want to get in and get quarterbacks like that are just in that like hodgepodge of like QB6 to like QB15 and make your 2 to 3 quarterback pairings out of that. For Fanball, teams selecting their QB2 on just 2 QB teams after round 12 carry a 7.6% win rate, but a 9.4% prior. So you're talking about a gap where we don't want to take our QB1 before round 7, but we don't want to take our QB2 on 2 QB teams after round 12. So we want to hammer other positions first and then come in and get 2 good quarterbacks, not elite quarterbacks, but guys that you would stream in fantasy or like have a platoon with. That's kind of what you want to have in best ball. These guys that are capable of QB1 weeks aren't going to give you a full season of QB1 weeks, but, you hope that those weeks sync up, on the oddball weeks. And then, FFPC is the same way. 2 QB teams manage just a 2.9% win rate waiting on their backup after round 13, as opposed to 7.7% win rate prior. Still below like the rate you want to be at. But you on Fanball with the 28-man rosters, you want to be in that 3 to 4 quarterback range. And, you're obviously allotted the opportunity to do that because you have, the 8 extra rounds of picks, even though you do have to take kickers there. So, I mean, you don't want to wait into the bottom rung. And that applies to the other onesie position, tight end as well. You don't want to be filling out the bottom of your roster at your late round picks, drafting quarterbacks and tight ends. As inherent as it may say, like, hey, I've got Travis Kelce already. I'm going to wait and just get a couple guys to get me through the lean weeks where Travis Kelce is like his random bunk game, or the quarterback wise as well. You definitely want to just, focus in on getting a grouping of good players instead of waiting to just get 1 good player and 1 bad player or 2 bad players to back you up, because that's not what the history and the results have shown is optimal strategy to kind of approach these 2 onesie positions. And it is a little bit different for a onesie position, kind of counting the tight end of this, and we'll get to tight ends, but quarterback, you only start 1 on both these sites. So you definitely don't want to be in the bottom of the barrel, but you also don't want to be in the top, just like your regular redraft league.
Let me get your guys' opinion here, because I'm doing a best ball right now, and I've read your articles, and obviously it's early. You don't know where these rookies are going to go. So that kind of, I never like drafting before the real NFL draft in anything, even if it's a mock draft for a site, because I want to know systems that these guys are going to play in, but that's neither here nor there. So I took your advice, and I took my first quarterback, Carson Wentz, in round 9. So
Okay.
It was starting to dry up a little bit, and I was between him and Daniel Jones. And I'm like, you know what? For my first QB, let me go Wentz. Let's see if I can get Jones coming back later. I didn't want to take a QB the next round, but I thought it fell off a cliff because of how many were already gone. And Matthew Stafford was available. different bye weeks than Wentz. So I said, you know what? Let me pull the trigger there. So I've got Wentz, I've got Stafford. I'm sure I'll find another guy later. I'll put in
What
there.
site is this on?
This is on Fanball.
Okay. I think that you like if you're gonna go 2 QBs, like you're probably okay. Like you're probably okay stopping.
Well, the injury history with those guys just scare the bejesus out of you. So, I mean, I'll get
the dice roll here.
Look,
injury history is going to be part
if
of
I
all
could
these.
get Kevin Cobb to show up and play, then then I'd get him. And I told Rich I would bring that on the show, but I started that draft early. I should say I took Travis Kelce in round 2, which I never usually take a tight end that early, but I wanted to see what it looks like. I'm going to do a bunch of these. So looking at that Travis Kelce early, how do you guys think I should approach the rest of this draft as I get later when another tight end should kind of be coming off the board? When should I look at those guys? Should I take 2 or 3 more tight ends, or just say, you got Kelce, you're just going to hope he gives you the numbers every week?
Yeah, I'll let Rich go first, talk the strategy, and then if we want to talk a few players, I'll jump in.
Sure. Yeah. So what round are you in now in this draft?
All right. So right now we're up to, it's coming back to me in the 12th.
In the 12th, and you only have Travis Kelce, correct?
That's it.
Yeah. So I mean, on Fanball, like historically over this recent stretches, you want to have 2 to 3 tight ends rostered, no matter what. It's like an optimal plan. So these best balls too is I don't actually play these from like a top down view of say like I have to enter with 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. I like to play the probability within the positions and like how I like to treat it positionally. And handle how to draft positions in the correct type of rounds and play the probability that way. So I know I want to have 2 or 3 tight ends. You need to have that, but I also want to draft them optimally. And like I said, I want to have Travis Kelce. So top tight ends have had a major edge in best ball, over the stretch of data I've collected. Teams at Fanball taking their first tight end over the opening 4 rounds have notched an 11.1% win rate. Remember, the baseline is 8.3% compared to just 7.5% win rate afterwards. FFPC teams are at 11% win rate compared to 7.4%, taking their tight end in the first 4 rounds and afterwards. Where you don't want to get hung up on is drafting your first tight end in like that in the middle tiers. That has just not been profitable at all. You want to avoid that. Teams at Fanball taking their first tight end in rounds 5 through 8 have just a 6.9% win rate. As opposed to taking their, tight end afterwards, it's 8.3%. So you might as well just wait and try to catch like a Darren Waller or a guy after that. We can talk about some guys maybe we think are Darren Waller this year. But yeah, you want to avoid like just because you missed out on Ertz, Andrews, Kelce, Kittle, that doesn't mean like you just like force the issue and take like the tight end 6. Or you get in and take Hunter Henry in the 6th round because you're pressing the position. That's been a losing strategy so far in these leagues, from the data I've collected. But going back to say when you should take your second tight end, so you want to buy in that range, which you kind of missed on. You don't want to wait for your tight end too, which is kind of the boat you're in. So teams taking their second and final tight end on 2 tight end teams, this is really only a strategy to take at Fanball. You don't want to just leave with 2 tight ends on FFPC because 1, that's tight end premium. And then 2, you can possibly start 3 tight ends because there's 2 flex spots there as opposed to 1 on Fanball. But teams taking their second and final tight end over the final 5 rounds of the draft at Fanball have just a 7.1% win rate as opposed to 8.8% prior, which is still above that baseline. So just like quarterback, you don't want to wait too long. Even if you have an elite guy, you don't want to wait to the bottom of the draft and just say, well, I have Travis Kelce. Like, it's okay. I can just go ahead and throw my favorite dart throw, at the end and just hopefully has a good week when Travis Kelce has like a 7-point game. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to alternate because there's weeks where Travis Kelce is gonna, that tight end might fill your flex spot and stuff like that. So I mean, you want to hold on to that. Obviously on FFPC it's a little different. They have the multiple tight ends. It's the tight end premium. But you taking a tight end like I hit on to open, though, that's like the hot spot. It's a big edge taking tight ends early. Taking tight end actually in round 1 at FFPC is a higher win percentage than running back. It's not the same at Fanball, but taking a tight end with your second pick has been the most optimal strategy you can have on both sites by far. You want to start with running back first, but so like running back tight end is the best start you can make in both formats. I highlight these in the articles.
Good.
10.3% win rate at Fanball, 12.3% at FFPC. It's the most optimal first 2 rounds you can play. Do not take wide receivers in the first round in any circumstances. Even if you have to force it, just don't. It's a losing strategy on both sites. We'll get into some wide receiver strategy a little bit. But think about last year, Michael Thomas had the largest positional edge from wide receiver 1 scoring standpoint to a wide receiver 2 scoring standpoint in over 20 years. He wasn't even the highest wide receiver in win rate in best ball fantasy leagues, not in either site. Guys like DJ Shark were ahead of him. Devontae Parker, Allen Robinson, all those guys had higher win rates on sites than Michael Thomas. You want to start with a running back, and then you want to come in on tight ends. Like I said, it's been a positional edge. Maybe we see it shift, like quarterback as well, because we didn't get in this in the quarterback segment. And I know I'm kind of running on here, but maybe quarterback shifts, because the hot spot for quarterbacks has been like that fringe QB1, QB2 range. But remember, the last 2 years, what quarterbacks came from that range?
Right. You're getting
Mahomes and Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes initially set the record for fantasy points, highest scoring fantasy quarterback in NFL history. Fantasy altogether for a season. Then Lamar Jackson had the highest fantasy points per game for quarterbacks. He sat out week 17 of last year, so he didn't catch Mahomes in total points, but the highest fantasy points per game. So now, we can't count on just a guy from that range being the best quarterback of all time again. It's happened 2 years in a row. Eventually that's going to shift. That dynamic's going to shift. So, it's going to be curious to see who's ahead. If maybe we see early quarterbacks have a little more pinpoint accuracy than they've had the past years, just because the weight of Mahomes and Jackson the past few years has carried that segment of the draft. We just can't expect, the QB12 or the QB15 every year to have not a QB1 type season, but a record-breaking type season.
Right.
So, Dwayne, let me get some player perspective from you. That's where you excel, really. And I started with Dalvin Cook. I had the 4th overall pick in this draft. So I went Dalvin Cook, came back around with Travis Kelce. Then my strategy was I want to build a floor of very productive wide receivers who I can count on week to week. I don't want to have a team of Deshaun Jacksons. Okay. So I went Keenan Allen, Adam Thielen, and then my other receivers at this point are T.Y. Hilton, and I shot a little higher with Will Fuller. So looking at those guys, give me some outlooks for 2020 on Keenan Allen with a new quarterback, Adam Thielen, who we've already expressed in prior weeks here that we really like in Minnesota without Stephon Diggs. Hilton's got a new quarterback, Phil Rivers, and Will Fuller now, if he's ever healthy, is, we think, the man in Houston.
Yeah, I don't really have a problem. Well, we can start with Thielen. Like you said, we've already talked about Thielen. Thielen's a great player, anyway. He's just had to deal with the injuries the last couple of years. And, he's actually, Rich and I were tweeting back and forth a little bit about this offense the other day on Twitter. We were talking more about Irv Smith and the departure of Stephon Diggs. But, for Thielen, he's a good player already. That's the number one thing, right? You don't just automatically get target share because somebody leaves, but if you have a really good player and now there's less to go around, a guy like Thielen you're going to expect him to probably see 26-27% target share, somewhere in there this year. So I feel great about him. I think he gives you a great floor, as long as if your goal was, hey, I want something steady every week, I think you're going to get that, out of him. You're still going to have the games where the Vikings don't have to throw the ball a lot, and they're just going to run, and the script's totally in hand, and Kirk Cousins throws 18 passes. That's going to happen like 3 times in the year. There's nothing you can do about it. But other than that, I think he's going to be super steady. Keenan Allen, I'm a little bit concerned about, because Tyrod Taylor, is really more of a see it and throw it kind of quarterback. He's not really great at getting the ball out of his hand right when he should, which Keenan Allen's game is all built around quickness, right? That short intermediate area where he creates that separation. And that's where he and Rivers, despite Rivers not having the greatest arm, they were always, they're simpatico in that way. So I could very easily see, Tyrod Taylor, and people, they dish on Phillip Rivers, but let's face it, Phillip Rivers, yes, he has deteriorated, but he's a quarterback that knows how to play quarterback in the NFL. And he knows how to be the right kind of fit for a guy like Keenan Allen. I'm a little worried about Keenan Allen, this year with Tyrod Taylor. I'm worried about, what's the pace of this offense going to be? I'm worried about, the nature of the way Taylor, plays, which is something that I already said. So I feel like, Keenan Allen, his floor has to be lower, than what it has been, in the past. Now, he's still the best target on the team. You know, Hunter Henry's a good player. Mike Williams is a good player, but Keenan Allen he's still the elite guy, you know, on the team. So for me, and what round did you take him in, Drake? The third?
Yes.
Or the fourth?
Third.
Yeah, I've seen him go as late as fourth. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so getting those two, I mean, for your goal of what you're wanting, I mean, I like it. I can't argue with either player. I'm probably not going to own a lot of Allen this year. I mean, I want to hear what, you know, Rich has to say about it. But as far as, you know, Hilton, I think Hilton gets an upgrade because the opposite just happened for him. He had Brissett, who was a see it, throw it quarterback, and Hilton, when he would create the separation, you know, Brissett would see it too late. And Brissett's not the most accurate quarterback, where Rivers is going to see him. He's going to get the ball to him in time. I think it's also going to be good for a guy we've mentioned before, potentially. You know, we'll see. Let's see what happens. Hopefully we get training camp, knock on wood. But a guy like Paris Campbell. But I think Hilton, you get an upgrade, you know, and I think Hilton's being underdrafted. Keenan Allen's probably being a little bit overdrafted. And then Will Fuller, I mean, man, you can't argue with it. Will Fuller, it's not like he hasn't put up these 30 and 40% target share games. We've never seen a year of it, you know, from him. You know, he's on pace for, you know, typically every year, even when he's hurt, you know, he's on pace for over 20% target share. I don't know that he can get a lot more than that. He may by default pick up 1 or 2%. But I still think, you know, DeAndre Hopkins was doing so much for that offense, pulling so much coverage away. I think it's going to help Will Fuller a little bit. He may get a few extra targets, but I do wonder, you know, is his efficiency, you know, going to be hurt, right? Is that going to be something where that's going to pull him down a little bit with defenses able to focus more on him? Because, I mean, really, does Jordan Akins or Darren Fells or David Johnson, do any of these guys, you know, really, Kenny Stills, there's nobody else on the offense that really you have to fear. And anytime that happens, that's always a big hurdle for a player to have to show when they haven't had to be that guy and now they got to go do it. Historically speaking, that hasn't always been the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, I'm looking at T.Y. Hilton's ADP today over for his best ball 10 ADP, and it's in the middle of the 6th round. I mean, I think people are going to be, and that's where I got him, in the middle of the 6th round. I just think that's a guy who people are going to be sleeping on come August, September, when we're doing a lot of drafts, because we know he's a good player. He just had a below average quarterback play last year, and now he gets an NFL quarterback again. I think you're looking at a guy who you're going to get for possibly wide receiver 3 value, and he's going to put up maybe low end wide receiver 1-ish numbers. Am I crazy to think that?
No, I mean, all you're worried about is, you know, where he stands on the age apex, you know, his injury history. You know, are you going to get a full season out of him? But I like what you did there, because all the guys you took are the lead targets on their teams, which is what you always like to get at wide receivers, especially as you progressively move through rounds and those guys dry up. You want to get guys that are going to have those high target shares. And the thing about T.Y. Hilton is he's, you know, obviously had the archetype of being, you know, a vertical wide receiver, but he's also one of those guys that's played, you know, the small slot role, you know, entirely his whole career, you know, and we saw that last year with Jacoby Brissett. At the start of last year, T.Y. Hilton was on fire. You know, he was getting 30% of the team targets regularly, and lowest ADOT of his career, lowest yards per reception, because his, you know, he vertically didn't sync up with Jacoby Brissett, but the way he runs his routes on the interior as well was able to get him a high target share and high, you know, success rate of targets, you know, those kind of tertiary targets that matter for us. And he was a really good – people forget to start the year, the first 5 or 6 weeks, T.Y. Hilton was a functional, tangible fantasy wide receiver, a wide receiver 2+ weekly. He wasn't dropping those 140-yard games like we were getting with Andrew Luck, but he was getting you the 6 for 70s and getting end zone targets at the time. Like, they were drawing up plays for him in the end zone, and then, you know, the injuries caught up to him. But I'm glad Dwayne kind of took it there, because I was gonna try to steer it into a direction to get his opinion on the Texans situation, because we see a lot of these splits that are getting dropped out in these streets. You know, Deshaun Watson throwing to non-DeAndre Hopkins targets.
I saw that. I know
how good he's been, but at the same time, DeAndre Hopkins has been on the field for those targets.
Right.
So I was real curious to get his take on, you know, and he kind of touched on it a little bit, but I was real curious to get his take if he wants to go into further detail on it. Removing DeAndre Hopkins from the field for those other guys like a Kenny Stills, like a Will Fuller, who have been, you know, 2 bananas like their whole career, like up to this point. And, you know, Will Fuller wasn't that in college, but, you know, his archetype of a game is not a guy like you want to funnel 14 targets to. It's just that he's not functioned in that type of role really, outside of like, a random game here or then, like the Falcons game last year. But he's not been that archetype of player in the NFL yet. So I'm curious to what this does to this offense. You see them bring in a guy like Randall Cobb, kind of immediately right after that trade. And we assume David Johnson's going to get some targets. They're going to use him in the passing game. They still have Duke Johnson. But what does this do for not only those receivers, but also, Deshaun Watson himself?
Yeah, for me, it to tell you, I mean, the most recent draft that I was in, Deshaun Watson was just sitting there, and I just kept letting him sit there. I mean, and it's not that I think Deshaun Watson's going to be terrible. It was just enough to make me feel, you know what, I'm just going to keep filling these other positions out. He's not sitting up in a tier, whereas before, last year, if Watson fell to one of those spots, that was when I was like, and typically I'm a guy that I'm going to wait on quarterback, but he was the kind of name that if he fell, I was like, you know what, he's in a good enough tier that I'm going to take him. And now with what's happened is I'm worried about it, just because I feel like Hopkins is a truly elite player, and, he does a lot for that offense. Now we've seen big time receivers leave, and we've seen offenses, do some things. Another one I think you even mentioned recently, or it might've been Mike Clay, like thinking about the Giants, after Beckham left last year, but they also brought in, and they already had multiple pretty good pieces, no elite pieces, but they still had Sterling Shepard on the slot. They brought in Golden Tate. You have Evan Ingram. You got Barkley out of the backfield, and then Slayton came in and was able to, as you say, Rich, lift some lids. And so they truly had a holistic offense that could attack all these different parts of the field. That's what I'm concerned about, whenever I think about what Deshaun Watson's going to be facing, as well as Will Fuller. I just don't see anybody that can attack all those other areas of the field and really scare a defense. And then if Will Fuller can't be a big part of your game plan and that's taken away, man, I just really worry, what is the true ceiling for Deshaun Watson if that's the case?
In this draft, just to give some context here, because as we all know, context matters with you two guys, Deshaun Watson went at the end of the 8th round.
Yeah.
I passed on him because at the time on the board, there was Watson, Ryan, Breeze, Rodgers, all still on the board. So I said, I'm going to let those guys go. And of course, they all went before my next pick when I took Carson Wentz. But yeah, that shows that Deshaun Watson is, Josh Allen was taken before he was. Kyler Murray was taken before he was. So people are definitely a little apprehensive on the Texans quarterback. Let's flip over now, Rich. And Rich Hribar from Sharp Football Analysis is our guest tonight on the Fantasy Football Hustle. Let's talk wide receivers. We just talked about the guys I drafted. What is the plan that you've come up with for best balls? Obviously, we've seen zero RB doesn't work in these situations. So taking 3 or 4 wide receivers to start might not be the best way to go. It looks like on FanBall, it's kind of a thing where you go, you're taking 7, you're taking 8. And 78% of players took 7 wide receivers, and you get almost to 9% win percentage with 7 or 8 wide receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was someone that used to do those like Pros vs. Joes tournaments, their FBC formats. And, I thought like zero RB could work on something like that. I'm going to hammer wide receiver. It's full PPR. But, you only have to start 2 starting wide receivers there, which is a big difference in FanBall. You have to play 3 wide receivers. 3 wide receivers are going in your lineup every week, potentially 4 at that flex, whereas the most you can still is max out at 4 on FFPC. So going wide receiver early there has definitely not been fortuitous for drafters. It has you can mix and match at FanBall and come with some strategies. I've actually uncovered that like modified zero RB is by far the best strategy to go there. You should be employing that at FanBall based on the history of how those leagues have played out. You should be going running back early, potentially tight end at pick 2, and then just hammering wide receiver for a little bit, because even taking your RB2 later has paid off, and we can get into that. But starting wide receiver has been the worst of all things. Don't start with wide receiver in route 1 in any site. Don't do it. Taking wide receiver 1, like I said, hasn't paid off. Teams starting off with wide receiver is even worse. Those teams have a 6.6% win rate on FanBall, 5.5% win rate on FFPC. Don't do it. I've made that mistake before. Those teams didn't win. But teams taking at FanBall taking 3 to 5 wideouts in their first 6 picks, that front portion of the draft, have a 9.4% win rate. So, like I said, hammer wide receiver early after you get in and get your supposed bell cow. Now you're going to draft some bell cow teams that flame because you're going to take the wrong bell cow, the guy that gets hurt, or you're just going to run in some variants. But if you're just someone that plays these with some volume and you want to, come with a positive, it could be positive EV and come out with a positive, ROI and win rate. That's how you're going to approach it. You're going to approach these things by going bell cow, probably tight end, or if you get one of these elite wide receivers, maybe you can get another tight end, maybe in round 3, and then just hammering wide receiver, for that front portion of the draft, then shifting back towards running back. Teams at Fanball that started their drafts off with a running back in the first round, and then have even gone crazy and have taken up to 5 straight wide receivers. Those teams have an 11.4% win rate. But you look at Fanball, 37% of teams have waited until the 6th round or later to take their 3rd wide receiver. So taking your wide receiver 3 after the 6th round, 37% of all drafted teams have done that. Those teams only have a 7.2% win rate, 9% prior. So, you want to get in on Fanball and load up on wide receivers in those tiers. You don't want to pay for an elite one. You don't want to pay that premium dollar, but you want to go with kind of a modified zero RB approach, not a full zero RB approach, but you want to go in and hammer those wide receivers from that point, and then shift back towards running back and get into that area. And then at FPC, it's even worse. FPC formats teams taking their wide receiver 3 after round 6. Just 8.2% win rate. Teams taking their wide receiver 4 after round 6, same 8.2% rate, but it's 9.2% prior. So you want to get in and get these wide receivers, before, waiting on them. We think that there's a lot of depth at the wide receiver position, but you want to hit running back early, hit tight end early, and then just focus on wide receiver and then come back in on those other positions.
Boy, I'm feeling good now with this team. My reading comprehension must be through the roof because I read your articles and did this. So I started Dalvin Cook, went Travis Kelce, then started hitting these receivers, Keenan Allen, Thielen, Hilton, Fuller. Here's my running backs, okay? So my RB2 is Damian Williams. Dwayne knows I have an undying, unhealthy obsession with Damian Williams, and I don't know.
I'm good with it, Drake. In that round, I'm good with it. I had to talk you off the 2nd round ledge last year.
I got him in the 5th here. And then I got another guy that Dwayne was really high on last year. And I don't know how much people are going to talk about him this year because the situation has changed so drastically, is James White. Now, he's going to have a new quarterback. They still don't have any receivers. And this is a team that, in theory, should be in much closer games or trailing a lot more than they have been in the past. He's my running back 3. I'd love to get your guys' talk on that. And then I kind of just wanted to lock down that Minnesota backfield. Maybe it was early, but I didn't care. Alexander Madison. I'm in the range of Tevin Coleman, Justice Hill, Latin Murray, Justin Jackson. So I said, let me just lock down a good running game. And now I've got Minnesota, hopefully. So let me get your thoughts on those guys, Dwayne. Damian Williams, and then James White.
Yeah, man. I actually like, the Damian Williams pick, in that range.
There we go.
Even if he only gets 15 touches a game, he can pay off, in 15 that range.
15 touchdowns. That's all we need.
There you go. Yeah. 15 touchdowns per game in your book, Drake. Yeah. So, I think now he's a realistic, he's realistically, priced. So, Darwin Thompson still, we'll see what they do in the draft, but we'll have to see what plays out with Darwin Thompson. Still a guy that I like. But as far as, Madison, I don't mind it. What round did you have to do that though? Did you have to do Madison?
The 11th.
Yeah, I don't mind that. In certain offenses, I don't mind it. They want to have a run first offense. We know Dalvin Cook has had, injury issues. He's your round 1 pick 4. I really have no problem with that. I'm not big on, locking my roster up with handcuffs, but in a situation like that for certain offenses, I really do like it. So, and you really just have the 2 clear guys, right? You have Amir Abdullah and you've got, I think, Boone. I don't know, Rich, if Boone's still on the team or not, but I think it's really clearly going to be, those 2 guys. And if Cook goes down, last year, whenever Cook went down, Madison was coming off of being injured himself. So we never really got to see was he truly going to be the guy to get, 60% of the carries, and, get 3 or 4 targets a game? But I think really he will be. A lot of people forgot that. And, they're like, oh, well, last year when Cook got hurt, Madison didn't get to play. Well, there's a reason. He was coming off of injury himself, and they were going to have to force him into playing. So Abdullah and some of the other guys got to see the field. But in the 11th round, I don't mind it. I don't like it when guys try to get real antsy and pull the trigger in the 9th round on stuff like that. I don't like trying to carry all my handcuffs, but on a running game like that, I don't mind it at all. I like it.
Cool. So we'll see what happens in this draft. This is a bunch of guys who, for those of you who don't know, I was in this thing called the ACI. It's a bunch of guys who listen to John Hanson's Sirius show with Adam Kaplan, NFL Insider. And I got in that, and I should have been the first non-John Hanson to win. I ended up coming in 3rd place. Because I think I had to start Jamal Charles or something.
You just made me look at a dynasty draft. I'm in a startup, and I took Dalvin Cook, and I was hoping to get Madison coming back, and you just jinxed it, Drake. He just went.
Oh, that was a hell of a humble brag. I like you dropping that in there.
I
actually love this time of the year drafting Damian Williams. He's one of my early targets, just because of the unknown. Obviously, his ADP is hanging where it is because a lot of people expect the Chiefs to add a back. They picked up his option, which was a no-brainer. I mean, he had his cap hit was $2.7 million. It was a no-brainer to pick up that option. But the Chiefs actually only have 5 draft picks in this entire draft. So, I mean, they're not a complete lock to take a running back. They just signed DeAndre Washington today. I think that they will probably add a late. I think they will probably add a running back late in this draft, but I think a lot of people are penciling them in at well, they have a luxury pick in round 1. They can take a running back or even in round 2. But I think when it comes to them in round 2, the guys that we would want to go there won't be there. I don't think Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be there, at 62, at that point. Dobbins isn't going to be there. So they would just keep bypassing. Then when you bypass the first 2 rounds, no one there's a lock to really be a threat. They could be, but no one's a lock. And, we keep getting the past 2 years, you'll play off Damian Williams. He's kind of like the Danny Amendola version of running backs, where he just goes nuclear in the playoffs. But you see a glimpse of it. And the Chiefs gave it to us all year last year. Damian Williams just never was healthy. But anytime he was healthy to play, they ran the offense through him. And he got the bulk of the snaps, got the bulk of the running back touches, and so on and so on. They wanted him to be they wanted him to fill that role in the offense. He just never got healthy and never could continuously stay healthy throughout the course of the season. It wasn't until very late in the year, and we saw him make that run and give it to us again. So did he flame out? He was a bad fantasy pick. He was where he was, in that 3rd round of last year. And he did not give you what you needed to get by.
Not if you were in a draft with Drake. You weren't getting him in the 3rd round. He's done in the 2nd, right?
Please. 112. It might be pulling it early. You never know. But
he would be texting me. He's like, dude, Damian Williams right here.
He's here.
But he did show it. I mean, when you look at, his final full 7 games played, this guy averaged 23 PPR fantasy points per game. You've seen it. There's a ceiling there in this offense and the way he's utilized, even against good defenses, like you saw through the playoffs, in that 49ers game. The way they use him, and as good as that offense is, it lifts all tides. That allure is going to be there. And I think the unknown of them drafting a running back, which, like I said, I think them taking an early round running back is actually probably on the lower end of the spectrum than people do believe. So I think that he's going to have less competition than people are really expecting in terms of talent. Now it still is the Chiefs, and they maybe, and he is still, a 30-year-old running back, so they can still easily function another running back in and possibly move on. But I love taking him at this point of the year because I think after the draft, if they do get a guy, say in the 4th round or later, because they only have 5 picks, that he will climb a round or 2 if that happens. That he's going to climb a little bit. So I like drafting at this point now because you're just playing the probability game of hedging on, hey, if they take a guy late, I'm going to get my value now early before the field comes in, unlike last year where we were taking him in the 3rd round and you at 112 and then we squeeze our value out.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden Darwin Thompson's going in the freaking 7th round, 8th round of some of my FFPC big drafts that I did. I
remember that.
Oh,
we were
my
like,
God.
what the hell's going on?
It was going crazy. Yeah.
Daryl Williams.
Tony Pop.
It happens in fantasy every summer. We try to take one of these late round guys and put them in.
They just keep pushing up.
And they do. They just keep climbing. Listen, we had none of us knew going in, because we knew Todd Gurley last year wasn't going to play in the preseason. We inherently knew, like, this guy's not going to play in the preseason. But Darrell Henderson just kept climbing and climbing. Darrell Henderson was like a 6th, 7th rounder at one point last year. It was just insanity because it was just such an unknown.
Hey, let's talk about, that's a good one, actually. Rich, let's get your thoughts on Darrell Henderson. It's one that the fantasy community is pretty split on, I think, because and when I say community, I mean, I'm talking, everybody, it's this whole ecosystem, all of us on Twitter, it seems to be, and it's that classic thing, right? If you spent a decent pick, which, last year you had to spend a 6th or a 7th if you're drafting, in the middle of the summer. He got a little cheaper as the summer got later, but a lot of people just feel burned by it. But now you have no Todd Gurley. This is a guy that didn't run, really in his own scheme in college. He ran more in a power concept with Memphis. Yep. The Rams tried to do some of that for him, but their game is still really built around this wide zone and trying to make everything look very similar. They do it with 3 wide instead of 2 tight ends like the 49ers do. But Henderson's a guy to me this year that it's funny. It's like people were more intrigued with him last year having Gurley in front of him than they are this year with him potentially not having Gurley. What do you think?
Yeah, I have kind of a mixed bag because I have, opinions on Henderson, the player, and then Henderson in the offensive climate he's in. I mean, Henderson, obviously, he was a guy in college like a Tevin Coleman. If you give him a tarmac, it's over. Like he's going to just hit you with explosive run after explosive run. And you talked about the scheme change obviously hurt him. I mean, he was a guy, he only had 43 touches his rookie year. I mean, it's embarrassingly low. I mean, that shows you what because when you only have 43 touches as a running back with playing alongside a running back that the coaching staff inherently reduced his workload, and then another guy who's played 5 years in the NFL and doesn't even have 1,000 scrimmage yards, and that guy's getting more touches than you. Even as a rookie, that still says something. You've got to make a jump. You've got to improve your own play. And then you just look at the situation like you kind of hit on. I mean, later in the year, the Rams shifted and they took that third receiver off the field, started playing the little bulkier sets. They did that for their offensive line, which is a problem last year. I mean, we talk about Todd Gurley, and Todd Gurley is just also an interesting conversation because, how much was Todd Gurley losing explosiveness, the arthritic knee, and how much was also the offensive climate of the Rams? That offensive line completely fell off. I mean, when your best offensive lineman is a 37-year-old left tackle and like you're contingent on like bringing him back, like that's a problem. I mean, you're trading for guys that have washed out at places like Austin Corbett, just on the cusp of being vagabonds, just to fill roles in your offensive line. I mean, that's a problem. I mean, you look at the drop off that Rams offensive line took from 2018 to 2019, and they have no cap space. They have no flexibility in the draft. How do we believe this offensive line gets better? Then you look at their role in the passing game. I mean, the Rams completely phased out the running back in the passing game last year. And it's not just a thing. I mean, really only the first 2 years at the Rams was a time when Sean McVay's offense threw to the running back. You go back to those Washingtons, they were not giving the running backs a lot of, a high percentage of running back targets in their offense either. So are we just supposed to this target share to bounce back? It was a one-off year, and they're going to involve the running backs more in the passing game. I'm not so sure that is. I mean, I think that probably you would look at the success that Tyler Higbee had at the end of last year, or even the success that Gerald Everett had when he was forced into a lead target share role, that offense might just be better served functionality-wise to go through those tight ends than it would be to incorporate a Malcolm Brown or Darrell Henderson into the passing game. So offensive climate-wise, I just don't really see a projectable amount of touches for Darrell Henderson if you can separate that I believe are in terms of efficiency strong enough to kind of float him, because let's say we know he's not going to get 300 touches. Say if he settles at 230 to 240, that's adequate. We can totally at his draft price, that's strong. But if they're going to come and behind the same, it's an ineffective offensive line, and they're going to come without receptions. And then if you want to factor in how they used these backs last year, the one area where Malcolm Brown actually was effective was near the paint. So, I mean, if Malcolm Brown is going to hang on to that role and be a touchdown thorn, so now we have Darrell Henderson getting a significant amount of touches. He's getting 14 to 16 touches per game, but he's not catching passes and he's not scoring touchdowns. That is an inherent problem for our game because we care about money touches. And it's kind of a situation where we see like Melvin Gordon signing on with Philip Lindsay, and people last year wanted to elevate pre-draft a guy like Matt Breida. But the reason that I was trying to steer people away from Matt Breida was that same reason. He's not going to serve that role in the passing game, and you're not going to give him goal line touches. When Tevin Coleman got hurt at the beginning of the year, it wasn't even Raheem Mostert that stepped right in. Who did they brought in? Jeff Wilson off the practice squad to come in and run in for all these touchdowns. And you have to worry about these archetypes, these tweener running backs that are not your 220-pound archetypes, or these coaching staffs are going to say, yeah, we'll pound this guy into submission. If they don't catch passes and they don't score touchdowns, and they're the RB2, that doesn't necessarily make them the RB1 when that other incumbent loses his job. It's a tricky spot, and I'm worried that Darrell Henderson is kind of in that archetype of area where he's just not going to catch enough passes or score enough touchdowns to circumvent, the amount of efficiency he's going to need to make up for it.
Yeah, I think it's something we're definitely, and I know people say preseason doesn't matter. Like for me, there are certain things I do look for in the preseason. Like a guy like this, there's plenty to look for, right? Are they changing the scheme to better enable him? Or has he improved and they're just asking him to actually run in the zone scheme? So I think there's things you'll be able to pick up around Darrell Henderson. Things that can be tougher to figure out, though, is, hey, who's going to be the goal line back versus not? Coaches will do weird things. Some coaches will tell you more than others with what they do in the preseason. So it's probably still going to be muddy. But I think the biggest point you hit on that has made me kind of so back and forth on him is I just don't see a lot of room for him in the passing game, just because there's so many weapons on this team with Higbee and Everett and Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, and who knows what's going to happen with Brandon Cooks, but there's just, even if Brandon Cooks leaves, there's still a lot of mouths to feed. So if I thought that Henderson could really carve out a role, where he could get to like 10-12% target share, it would just make me feel so much better about him. I still think he can be an explosive player, and I've got my eye on him. And I want to, he's a guy that I'm monitoring for sure. But yeah, the biggest bummer for me is I just worry that he can't pick up those passing targets.
This is the Fantasy Football Hustle. Thanks for joining us, everybody. If you're listening on a podcast platform, please go over to iTunes or wherever you get this show. Give us a review, give us 5 stars, say how much you love us, say, hey, Dwayne's great, Drake sucks, whatever you want to do. And then please subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching the show right now, we beat you over the head with the advertisements for subscribing to our YouTube channel. Just give us a subscribe there, and you'll get all our great content throughout the summer. And Rich Hribar is our guest, Sharp Football Analysis. And it's funny you said the word tweener, because I wrote that down when I was looking at your articles on NFL player comps. That's the exact word I wrote for J.K. Dobbins and DeAndre Swift. So I'd love for you to kind of break down this comp system and how you came up with it and what goes into it. And then looking at these guys who everyone's like, DeAndre Swift's amazing, Dobbins is great, Taylor, but it's like those two specifically, it's like they kind of don't fit into like, I don't know, big time running back molds. Whereas, DeAndre Swift, your comp for them at best, Kamara, Miles Sanders, but there's also some scrubs in there too.
Yeah, it kind of goes both ways. So my opinion on this is kind of twofold. One, there's the NFL stance where we try to get in the mind of an NFL head coach. And NFL head coaches tend to not give guys with these types of body types, lead roles. And these guys are tweeners, and they can go either way. You have a 215-pound back. We've seen it with the Saints a little bit. The ceiling for these guys ends up being like 280 touches, instead of 340 touches. You're running these monster seasons. It can go either way depending on the coach and the player. But my personal opinion is there's no proof like for a coach not to give these guys 300 touches. Like there's no reason like you couldn't give Duke Johnson 240 carries in the NFL. Like there's no proof that shows he would get hurt more than a 225-pound guy. There just isn't. But these coaches don't do that. So you kind of, as a fantasy player, have to kind of throw into some coaching dichotomy into this in your decision making and how to take this. And this is the same thing we're going to have. The problem we're going to run into with Austin Eckler, barring what we see happens in this draft, like how this plays out for him coming this season. Will he be an actual RB1 or will he be like an RB1A?
What's funny is then like folks on Twitter will be like, "Oh, but Justin Jackson's the bigger back." I'm like, dude, he's like 199.
And that's the thing. The Justin Jackson thing too is again, he's another smaller guy.
He's tall. He's tall,
Yeah,
like 6'2", but he's like 199.
And we talked about it with like a guy leading in this, Matt Breida, another guy. Like he just doesn't like coaches are really hesitant to give in. Now, a guy like Matt Breida is a lot lighter than a guy like a Dobbins or DeAndre Swift, not in that 210 plus range. We're talking about 190-pound guys. A guy like Philip Lindsay's a great example. You can give a 190-pound guy a bunch of touches. It's okay. Like, don't worry about injuries. Now, he had other problems giving him the touches, especially in the pass game and pass pro and pass efficiency, which is what they came out and wanted to address in the signing of Melvin Gordon. They wanted to improve in those areas. But, there's no proof that these guys do get hurt at a high rate. We've seen Christian McCaffrey is probably the number one example. Dude plays, he doesn't come off the field. He's not the touch, like he doesn't even come off the field at all. Like he's playing 90. You got a guy playing 95% of the snaps at running back at like 208 pounds. But coaches tend to, I call them these guys I call them purgatory backs, is what I refer to them as. These guys that get touches, but the touches that aren't important to us. They're not catching passes. They're not scoring touchdowns. So you don't get fantasy points for those. I mean, you just don't. I mean, even if you're a high efficiency player like Matt Breida, you're not a fantasy factor. Because you're not scoring touchdowns, you're not catching passes. This is what we care about. And now those two guys kind of fall into that range where they can go either way. I have personal opinions on like their games being different than that. I think that they do skew more towards being workhorses and bell cows, especially. I mean, you look at Dobbins and his last 5 games of his collegiate career. I mean, this guy averaged almost 30 touches per game his last 5 games of his collegiate. He carried that. He was carrying that offense, especially then when Justin Fields got hurt in that Michigan game. He carried them the rest of the way in that Michigan game. And then you think about the last time we saw him on the field against Clemson, a team that that beat them and went on to the final 2. He had 220 scrimmage yards with a pound of tape around his ankle, in that game. But yeah, these comps that I created at Sharp Football, circling back here to why I generate these, and I do it every year. So anytime you get to draft season and these player comps, they run wild. They skew. It's inherent. Like we do this. It happens. But when you come up with like a specific player trait and you're always going to lean to like the high end ranking. You're going to be like, oh man, like that catch, that body control, that was just like DeAndre Hopkins. Or, it's just natural to go to the high end range outcomes on these players. That's where your mind goes because it sticks out in your head. But there's all these players that have come into the league that have had these same kind of, player comps that were valued by the league objectively as first round picks. And they value these guys on a level of the players that worked out, but they don't work out. And, I try to just do it from an objective stance just because fantasy football is an inherently sobering game. We miss a lot more than we'd like to. I want to bring, and especially in the prospect game, because you look at just general prospects, even if the guys that we think are good, like it's just a losing endeavor. There are people that are better at drafting teams that are better at drafting than other teams, but everyone's bad at it.
And over time, and the data actually shows that over time it just evens out.
There are
like certain teams may be ahead for a 2 or 3 year period, but then like if you look at them, you go back and look 6-7 years, everybody kind of falls back together.
Right, because the other teams become bad and they get better picks and they get better players.
Well, it's not just that. They're grading for where they're picking, too. So I mean, the way the equation works. But
I saw that actually just recently on Twitter, and the Patriots, I think, were the number 1 team in that list. And people, when they look back at the Patriots, rarely say like, oh, they draft all these studs because they look at all the misses at the receiver position and stuff. But I mean, the Patriots, they find these guys from somewhere that lead them to Super Bowls. So
yeah, they had a ton of late round hits and guys that they haven't been able to retain, but a lot of guys that have hit in that area where it's a lower hit rate, rounds 4 through 7. You think like Trey Flowers and James White, that area. Those guys have gotten a lot of production out of those guys, which is typically a spot where like we get anything out of guys in that area. But I wanted to generate these objective comps where it's just like I went in, pulled in my running back model, my wide receiver model, and showed like based on just the Z-score average of career production, final year production, physical profile. Like, no, these are like the true actual like just objective comps. And now it's not always a one-off. Like these guys don't always play like the objective player, and especially at the running back position where you're going to use a little more subjective traits in your process than you would from an objective stance. But it's just kind of like I said, to create more of a sobering process to say like this is where the league valued these players that had similar production, similar age, similar physical profile, and this is where they went in the draft. And then I also like it too from an objective stance of that you also we have the benefit of hindsight in. So when we say someone like, oh, Nelson Aguilar popped as a comp for this player, well, that guy must suck. No, like Nelson Aguilar the prospect and Nelson Aguilar the player are two different entities. Like, because we have hindsight cooked in, and there are a myriad of variables that play into how a player's career plays out. And there are a lot of things that are even beyond control of the player, outside of scheme and quarterback play. And Aguilar might be one of those guys, like the mental side got to him. And, he had struggles, getting over some of his, early career struggles. He did have a bounce back in year 3 when they moved him inside, and then kind of just oscillated right back to having those same similar struggles that he had playing as a boundary receiver his first 2 years. But, people say, oh, yeah, Justin Blackmon popped up as a comp on that, so he must be terrible. Like, Justin Blackmon was he was taken at pick 5 overall. That's where the league valued him.
He was such a sick college receiver. Like, coming into that process, he was amazing.
Yeah, so people see that stuff, and it's they say, well, that was a bad comp, but you're comping the result to the player. Where I'm keeping this just as players entering the league from an objective stance and syncing these players up and saying, well, here are the top 5 guys the past 10 drafts that were drafted that represent this player the closely, just from an objective stance. Like, obviously, I think that I do the same thing. I have subjective feelings on these players and understand where they're good at and where they excel at in the NFL and where their best functionality is served. You might have a 205-pound guy like Jalen Reagor, and he might, that type of archetype might profile. He might have some career NFL slot guys pop as objective comps to him, but that's not really his game. It's not going to be his game in the NFL. And I understand that. It's just literally just coming up and saying here, slow your roll and just saying this guy is Deshaun Jackson, and hey, these are some similar guys that were coming into the league that you may think that were bad, but the league valued these guys as good prospects, and the draft gurus also valued these guys as good prospects as well. And I just try to put those on the table for some people, just kind of one, see some great names, blast from the past names, but also, like I said, just provide a sobering edge here, because we talked about before the show we were on, and when I worked with Fantasy Douche, Frank DuPont, the first thing I learned was understand where you're wrong. And I feel like in the prospect game, the thing that lacks in the prospect game from an NFL stance, first of all, evaluating is that teams are just way too confident in their player evals. And then it's just a big problem, because you're talking about kids, man. You're talking about the oldest these guys are 23 years old. And just the NFL operates on way too of a confidence-based system. In understanding their player evals. Because I know as a fantasy drafter, we're familiar with these players just scoring fantasy points. I draft fantasy teams with the understanding I'm going to be wrong a lot. And you just don't see that. And then people handle the draft this way. And that's why these teams have such a losing, such failure, in terms of the NFL draft. So I like to put those on there and, some of those comps just to see people and see some of those objective names that pop up.
So talk about some of your comps that you have on here for the folks that are listening for Dobbins.
So Dobbins. So Dobbins is a great one, because you hear his first comp, you're going to be like, oh, I don't want any part of this guy, because his top hit and almost a complete overlap is Bishop Sankey coming into the league, and you'll say, oh, Bishop Sankey, well, that dude is terrible. I drafted him. But you think about Bishop Sankey, the prospect coming into the NFL. Loads of production coming out of Washington. He was taken with high draft capital, pick 54. Dobbins might not even get taken at pick 54 in this draft.
And Sankey was overdrafted by the Titans.
Yeah, but I mean, but Sankey, high athletic profile, crushed Indianapolis.
Yeah, everything.
Crushed the combine, had production.
All of it, yeah.
If you just look at him on paper, he had all the things set up for him to succeed. So he's a great question. Is Bishop Sankey the player a miss? Is the NFL's evaluation of Bishop Sankey a miss? Is it the model? Is it just the model's, the consideration of miss? He's a great conversation point to stem off of it. Because like I said, when you see Bishop Sankey, I was like, oh, well, Dobbins must be terrible if that's his top. But we're comparing Bishop Sankey, the prospect entering the league. He was the top running back taken in that draft class. So I mean, you have that, but then you also have, Dalvin Cook pops up as a comp for him, Aaron Jones, Duke Johnson, other guys. But like you say,
dude, don't leave off Ryan Williams. That's the name.
Ryan Williams is a great college running back.
I love Ryan Williams.
And would he break his leg? He had a lot of injuries.
Injuries.
He had a patellar tendon and then came back. And that was at the time where no one came back from patellar tendons, but he did come back And then he had, I believe, a clavicle injury or shoulder injury, and like he played 5 games the second year and then just never bounced back. I believe he signed on with
He was with the Cowboys. Yeah,
he never made it out of the preseason.
Yeah.
But also, Ryan Williams taken in the top 40. He was regarded as a high draft pick. Yeah, sure, like it didn't work out, but like I said, you're basing this on the results in hindsight and not of coming into the league. And that's just why I try to put this on the table, because yeah, we can compare Jonathan Taylor to Adrian Peterson. You're going to go there. But what about, like Trent Richardson? There's other guys that were, taking his top 5 picks that came with similar profiles. It's not a slam dunk with these guys. And I just try to put some of that on the table, just like food for thought and understand a range of outcomes for players. It's not to say like J.K. Dobbins is Bishop Sankey, like put it in stone. It says right there. No, it's just literally just to say, hey, this is a player that was similarly in a similar spot in the league, taking a similar draft capital. They have similar profiles, athletically, production. And this is how it was, and this is where the league valued this guy. So I like to put some of those guys on there. Denzel Mims, I think, is a favorite of mine, because I think he's a popular fantasy player. I struggle with him because, one, I did like a report on like non-declare players, wide receivers that aren't afforded to enter the league early, and he's a full he used up all of his collegiate eligibility, which is a red flag for prospects. But, people are putting him in the first round. He surged through the Senior Bowl. He crushed the combine, 92 percentile athlete at the wide receiver position. But then when you factor in, like, all right, let's pull up some comps for Denzel Mims that were non-early declares. Similar, production. They were productive players, and they were good athletes at the combine. And you get, like I said, his first top comp is a guy, Austin Pettis. People are like, who the hell's Austin Pettis? 3rd round pick out of Boise State for the Rams. Yeah. But same thing, 90th percentile athlete, same production profile, like did similar things. But it's not to say that Denzel is going to be Austin Pettis. It's just to say, like, yeah, here's an alternative of like where this guy was valued. Leonard Hankerson, another guy that pops up on his list. It's fun because you need this check during prospect season. So like I said, we're just too confident, and we think the outcome for these guys are going to be, and you just slowly roll a little bit on these guys.
If you read this, I won't spoil it, so people will go and read the rest of the Denzel Mims ones at Sharp Football Analysis. But if I read all of the ones from Denzel Mims, it really makes me not want to touch Denzel Mims. Like when I read your whole list that you have him comp to, it's like, now, I don't really want any of those players.
One of the things you mentioned in your article is this year we don't see a lot of prototypical X receivers, that big size guy that commands the ball. We mentioned tweeners with running backs, but it's a lot of guys who project maybe as that big slot role that a Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin has made famous. And one guy I really want to talk about is Justin Jefferson, because as anyone who watches this show knows, I'm an Eagles fan. The Super Bowl is going on behind me over my shoulder. And Justin Jefferson out of LSU is a guy that projects in mock drafts to the Eagles a lot. Comps you have for him being, Aguilar, Justin Blackmon, Corey Coleman, but then it turns around with Chris Godwin. So I just love to hear a little more about Jefferson. I get conflicting reports on, well, he ran a fast time, but he doesn't play fast on film, and he can only play inside, and you need a fast guy on the outside. Otherwise, you can't have him on the inside. Your whole team will look slow. So I just love to get your guys' thoughts on Jefferson as the prospect, because he's going to go in the top 25 picks. Dwayne, you want to take that one? Or
toss it? Yeah, no, I like Jefferson. The way I look at, these players like this, I try not to overanalyze it. You hear a lot about, he played in the slot, he did this, he did that. All you can do as a player is you have to go with the opportunity you're given, right? He did great with that. And so from that aspect, I've watched Justin Jefferson. Actually, he's one of the guys I've probably watched more than I've watched at least 4 or 5 games of most of these players. His I've actually even dug up more than that. And to me, he's a guy that, he looks like, he knows what he's doing. He had good rapport with his quarterback. He was lining up in the slot and he had some bad matchups, but he also knew what to do. He knew how to be in the right place at the right time. He seems like a smart player. Then he came out and he ran faster than we expected him to at the combine. He looked plenty fast already, but then for him to come run that speed, I think he definitely helped himself from a standpoint of the NFL draft. So when I see a guy like Justin Jefferson, I'm probably higher on him, than a lot of other people. I don't really have him that far down from CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. CeeDee Lamb, I still, if I'm just looking for a guy that can make plays after the catch, it's definitely Lamb. If I'm looking for a guy that I want to be able to get open for me, running all sorts of routes and do it through separation, I'm going to go with Jerry Jeudy. So it's I like both of those players, but I think Justin Jefferson gives you some of, both of those guys. I mean, he's not as physical, as what you see from CeeDee Lamb. He's definitely got a little bit more of a, I don't want to call it, what's the best word for it? He's
a more finesse.
Yeah, finesse. I was looking for a different word than that, but we'll go with finesse. I was trying to get fancy, but yeah, finesse. I mean, he's a little bit more of a finesse player with the ball in his hands after, the catch. But he's a decent blocker. I've seen him blocking from the slot against linebackers and doing different things on film where I know he's got a lot of high effort. I feel good about Justin Jefferson. I think he should be one of the top 3 receivers taken, in my opinion. Who knows? Ruggs could spoil the whole thing because the NFL's so infatuated with speed and they think, oh, I'm getting Tyreek Hill or, the next version of Tyreek Hill with Henry Ruggs. So he could be a wild card. But for me, yes, I love Justin Jefferson. And man, you guys would be, if he lands with the Eagles, I don't like that. But I mean, he would be.
So let me be full disclosure here as I lean into the microphone, Rich. I need a new Eagles jersey. So I'm trying to get the digs on this guy right now. All right. So please tell me, I can't wear Kevin Cobb again to the bar. All right.
I actually do, from a subjective stance, I love Justin Jefferson because he actually did prove that he can win in both facets. I know that he gets he gets labeled as a big slot guy because that's the role he played in his offense last year. But at age 19, because he's one of the youngest receivers in this class, he was just 20 years old this year. At age 19 in 2018, he accounted for 30% of the LSU receiving yards, 35% of the team receiving touchdowns, and he only ran 19% of his routes in the slot. So, I mean, he could still win outside as well. I mean, he is, like I said, he's one of those tweener profile guys. But I'm curious to see, because this class in general, I talked to Sigmund Bloom on Twitter about this a little bit earlier today on how just like the depth of this wide receiver class is kind of run in this other direction where I think a lot of people are comparing this class to the 2014 class and thinking it can be that type of like out of the gates, like guys just delivering at their ceiling potential. But there aren't a lot of, like you said, prototypical alpha receivers. So I want to get Dwayne's take on this too. On one, does he believe that the NFL is transitioning away from the NFL alpha wide receiver because more wide receivers are on the field more than ever before? I mean, you look at the past 2 years, 70% of passing plays over the past 2 years have had 3 or more wide receivers on the field. Just last year, 4 or more wide receivers were on the field for 500 passing plays compared to just 300 the year before.
But 80% of that was the Cardinals, right?
Well, the first half of the year. But no, I mean, even like your regular team, three wide receivers on the field. So one, do we think there's a shift in that, and does that impact fantasy? Because I also wrote an article earlier right after the season about this, just kind of a fallback on what happened this year in the wide receiver position. And we've got over the past decade, a trend where wide receiver ones in fantasy are making less and less of a fantasy impact, and wide receiver 2s and 3s are making more of a fantasy impact, and wide receiver 1s are losing that fantasy edge. We talked a little about and how that has impacted best ball leagues of taking wide receiver like round 1 and round 2 hasn't really worked out. So, I mean, is this something, do you think from a real NFL stance is starting to show up in fantasy? Because I know you brought up, you hit me with that link, the rule of 3, and that could not just be wide receivers. It could, you can incorporate a tight end too. But do you see that transitioning now into the NFL game and then bleeding into the fantasy game? That one, you don't need an alpha receiver to function and have a high level passing game from a real football stance. And then 2, in fantasy, are we losing that era of the alpha?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the answer is, that it really depends. I think you can get by without an alpha receiver if you've got, 2 really good receivers and then an okay receiver that you can create stuff, through your scheme for, right? Who's good enough to be, a third corner or a third best defender on a team. However, I do believe that can still be a struggle to even assemble that kind of cast. I think there's several teams that are doing it really well right now in the NFL. But I think, for example, we just talked about a team like the Houston Texans. I don't think the Houston Texans can automatically come out in 3 wide and just fix the problem of DeAndre Hopkins being gone. So I think it still depends on the talent that's on the team. I think we even saw that last year with the Cardinals. The Cardinals came out and they ran the 3 and 4 wide, and Kyler Murray did better than we thought he would. But with Christian Kirk and who got banged up, and then you've got, Larry Fitzgerald, who's late in his career, and then you've got this cast of Demir Bird and all these other guys just kind of rotating through. I think that can be a little bit of a struggle. So I think, if you have an alpha, that can allow you to have your next 2 guys don't have to be quite as good. And I think you can still live that way. But to your point, I don't think you have to have it. What I like about the 3 wide and the 4 wide is I feel like it's opening up the game for a greater variety of types of players to get in the league and actually have a chance. Because if you look back to, even 10, 15 years ago, and there was always that notion of, the scheme wide receiver, and it was always tied, to specifically like Oklahoma, right? And thinking about all those wide receivers that came in and that were forced into, hey, we want you to go line up outside in a 21 personnel set. I think back to, what was I'm thinking of Mike Clayton, but it was Mark Clayton, right? That came out of OU. And then you had, multiple guys that came out of there. And now we're seeing some of these guys come out that are coming from those schemes, and they get put in a system where the field is more spread out. And it's more of a, hey, you're just going to run this little route. And we're just going to get you the ball and like you do your thing. And so that's one of the really cool things that I like about when you hear Cliff Kingsbury talk about his offense. And he's like, look, we're not really talking about routes. We're talking about space. We're talking about how you react to a defender. You also, you hear a lot of that same type stuff from Dub Maddox. I don't know if you guys have ever listened to his stuff. It's phenomenal. If you haven't, Dub Maddox, he's a coach, but he talks about, the landmarks and all the things he has receivers looking for. And it's a lot simpler for the players. And if you spread it out and you're giving some of these different, you keep using the word archetypes, I think this gives a lot more opportunity for some of these guys that aren't just a 6'3", 220 pound, hey, I can do everything kind of guy. It just puts them in better situations. And then as far as fantasy goes, there is a little bit of a downside because like you said, Rich, and thinking back to even what you were talking about earlier, hey, don't take wide receivers right away. Maybe this is part of what ties into that, because we've seen the value of receivers, slowly go down for your wide receiver 1, because wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 are often getting much more of the pie on their team. So you see a lot more teams that are going to be like the Giants, where you got 3 guys getting 20, 22% instead of 1 guy getting 30%. And then you got the next guy getting 18 and then another guy getting 12. You're seeing more of it being spread out. So yeah, I think it's something you have to react to in fantasy. The one other thing I'll say though, is I think, every so often we get kind of like this changing of the guard. We were really in that space 5, 6 years ago with runner. We didn't have a lot of great running backs in the league. Then David Johnson came in and kind of started getting things going, and then boom, the floodgates opened. All of a sudden you had Todd Gurley, you had Ezekiel Elliott, and now you got Saquon Barkley. Now we're flooded. Like I start looking at these lists of the backs, and there's some really good backs in this class, and I'm like looking around, I'm like, man, a lot of teams already really have, a really good running back on their team. I think what I look at now though is if we think about kind of the changing of the guard, we really don't have a replacement yet to Julio Jones. Maybe it's Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's a really good player, but we don't have a replacement to Julio Jones. We don't have, a replacement to some of these guys, and I think back even in my older days, with Andre Johnson, a lot of these guys that come along, there was always seemed to be this next crop of AJ Green and Julio Jones, 3 or 4 super studs that would come in. And it's not that I'm not saying we can't have one of those. We just don't have anybody that's jumped out. We thought it might be Beckham, and then he kind of got full of himself, and then injuries derailed. Of course, Antonio Brown was freaking phenomenal, for a long time, but we're also at a point where has the next wave really like entered the league yet? And it'll be interesting because I do believe that like when you have these truly elite players, whether the coaches are trying to get them the ball or not, quarterbacks can't help it. Like if they know a guy's going to be open really on pretty much any kind of route he's running, whether it's a deep route or it's a comeback route, or he's going to have to be physical and he's still tightly covered. Quarterbacks like that. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know what y'all's thoughts are. And what your thoughts are on the state of receiver overall, like that top threshold, because when I think about it, Rich, like I love Michael Thomas, but he's an underneath guy. He doesn't really go everywhere. And that's not a knock on Michael Thomas. That's the way they run that scheme. And man, he's awesome. He's great at it. But like Tyreek Hill, like I like Tyreek Hill, and he's very electric, and he's
just
great.
going to mention the Chiefs. The Chiefs don't have that alpha. Tyreek Hill's not that. Their alpha is Travis Kelce.
Yeah, I just don't see I don't see anybody to take that's ready to take the mantle. So kind of to answer the question, this is really long. I think, yes, all those things are going on, as far as the things you pointed out. The league is spreading out. That's pushing the players closer together in a fantasy aspect. But I'm also sitting here and I'm wondering, like, well, who's the last real super alpha to come in the league? How many of them do we truly have in the league right now? So, I mean, Rich, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point because when running back was, more older centric at that time, before that cusp, we got that wave of talent. Because remember, before we thought like the position was completely devalued, and then we saw a string of running backs get taken in the first round, and not even only the first round, like taking the top 10, in top 15, for Gurley and Zeke and Leonard Fournette. And now if you look at the landscape of running back position, the only older running backs that are lead running backs are basically Mark Ingram and kind of default Damian Williams. Everyone else is kind of in their age apex. I don't know if there's someone off the top of my head I'm missing, but it's really Mark Ingram's the only dude like over 30 that was like the lead back in his offense. Right. And then Damian Williams, is right there at just a hair under 30. But at wide receiver, we've got a litany of guys that are 30 plus past the apex curve that are leading depth charts. We talked about Adam Thielen, T.Y. Hilton, AJ Green still. Like these guys are older, and they're the number one wide receivers on their team. Julian Edelman, even last year coming in, the same thing. Like these older players, we haven't had that even with as good a class this is, and it's a deep wide receiver class, but there aren't those types of guys. We don't have a Julio Jones on paper. We don't have a AJ Green on paper. We don't even have Devontae Adams on paper. There's not 225-pound guys in this draft. All these top guys are, lean guys, 6'1", 208, 209, like in that area. That's kind of where everyone is. And that doesn't mean you can't be a lead fantasy wide receiver or a lead wide receiver one in your offense. It's just not that one dominant guy that has gotten by and just, I'm going to dominate the defense, like we've had from those guys. And we've come to expect, the archetype wide receiver one. Yep. Like we're going to lock into this guy. Because we've seen Antonio Brown do it. He was a wide receiver one as a smaller type guy, and we saw Stephon Diggs operate in that capacity last year, and a different light, kind of being more of a vertical play action guy. But you can CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy can definitely be wide receiver ones in an NFL offense. But I think if you were to ask in terms of probability, what do they profile as, you would probably lean towards 1A, 1B guys. Like you would probably lean towards that in terms of, what they project as. So we haven't had that crop, and maybe we will in upcoming years. Maybe we're going to have this turning point like we did at running back and have a 3 or 4 year run where we just get a bunch of, really dominant, super athlete wide receivers again, like we did. Maybe we got spoiled by it and we just thought that's what it was always going to be like.
It seems like that's what's going to happen because if those guys are out there, the college coaches are going to put them at receiver. So it's like it's gonna eventually happen probably. But then by then, how much has the league changed? It will be interesting to see. If you think back in the day, 30% target share,
running back changed a little bit like that.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Before we got that crop of elite running backs that came in, it started to get more compartmentalized, and that's carried over a little bit. Even getting some of those guys that have taken over those workhorse bell cow roles, it still has some teams have stuck with, no, well, we found the way, and it's to be more compartmentalized, have a guy serve specific roles, and maybe that happens to the passing game. I don't know. But like you said, we won't know until we see the actual, influx of talent that fits that same prototypical mold coming to the league to really, kind of test it against whether it being dead or not.
Quickly, guys, let me ask you, do you think this rookie class has a chance to disappoint because of the coronavirus, because of possibly the lack of OTAs, training camp, whatever season we're going to get this year? These guys aren't going to come in and have that, mini camp, rookie camp, these months that no one's really thinking about the NFL. These guys actually have practices and OTAs and rookie camps. Is there a strong possibility that, you say, hey, I'm going to take CeeDee Lamb here as my wide receiver 2 in fantasy, and all of a sudden you go like, my God, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He can't even get on the field because the guy has no reps. He doesn't know how to play in the offense.
Well, wide receivers in general, you want a slow burn anyways from a fantasy stance. We want to not have high expectations for rookie wide receivers. Running back's different because it's opportunity based. You get the ball a lot and you're on the field a lot, it's fine. But from a wide receiver, there's a lot more nuance that is involved in the transition. And then plus we have to take into account, like even from a regular offseason, going into a rookie season as an NFL player is having no offseason. You have no offseason. Your collegiate season ends in January. You play your bowl game. You immediately start training for the combine. You immediately go into rookie OTAs. Then you go into OTAs. You have no offseason. And so you're just playing football for 2 years straight through your rookie season. And I don't think a lot of people take into account like the toll that takes on, especially for a young kid in transitioning into this being a career and working at trying to outwork some of these guys where you're not the best player, just inherently that you're on your team or on the field. So, I mean, I always try to take the more of I don't want to say a negative stance, but more of I'm more pessimistic on rookies performing anyways, outside of maybe the running back position, just because, if you can project a guy for 300 touches, like that's going to matter for us. But I definitely take more of the slower roll angle for that reason. Of these guys, they're basically playing football for 2 straight years, transitioning from college to the NFL.
Let me before we get out of here, there is a league that you just joined and you're drafting in with some pretty big names in the industry. This is a 12-team dynasty startup best ball super flex. That's a mouthful. Let me hit you with some of the guys that are in this. Friend of the show, Evan Silva is in there. Scott Fish, Matthew Berry, Jake Seeley, Grant Barfield, Pat Thorman, yourself, Scott Barrett. This is kind of the who's who of fantasy football, and a big trade went down in this league. Let me go through this here and break this down. You're actually going to be on the clock pretty soon after this draft. I just clicked on a link. So in this league,
get ready, Rich.
Scott Barrett at the 102 CMC went first, took Patrick Mahomes. Again, we said possible super flex league. Then you and him made a trade. He gave up 211, 9-3, and a 1 next year for basically that 1-3 and a throwaway late pick. And then he took Lamar Jackson. So I just want to get your thoughts on, number one, why you decided to say, yeah, I'll do this trade to get the 1 next year and the extra 2. And then what are your thoughts on him having Mahomes and Jackson?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate to play in a lot of leagues with these guys, so I know a lot of these players, and this is actually typically counter game plan to what Scott tries to run. He's more of a longevity type player, and he's doing that a little bit here too, because he's just getting 2 quarterbacks that are going to play 15 years. But he's usually more passive. He's looking to trade down. But we're in another startup league too, and it's basically an inverse of a trade we made. I had 105 and took Lamar Jackson in a super flex league. They had 106, and I traded up and came up and took Ezekiel Elliott behind that and to their pick. And it was basically he inquired about trading up, and I said, if you want to do something similar to the trade we made in the other league, I'd be willing to do that. So we did that, and I think the different approach is, one, I play in a lot of these leagues, and I like to try different things and be aggressive, mix and match, being aggressive, try different strategies. In that other league, I was being really aggressive, trading up for the 2 second rounders. I actually traded up for a 3rd first rounder and traded for Michael Thomas in that league too. So I started Lamar Jackson, Ezekiel Elliott, and Michael Thomas in that league. So full studs and duds approach. Where in this league, I wanted to kind of slow play it a little more because for a couple reasons. One, it's best ball. Acquire another top 100 pick, get another future 2021 first. Because in best ball, we have a couple of things working for us. One, I don't have to set my lineup every week. Whereas in a typical super flex league, if you're setting your lineup weekly, you're going to set a second quarterback if he's available for you. You're always going to play 2 quarterbacks if he's available for you. But in this, my super flex spot isn't guaranteed to always be a quarterback. It's just not. And even for Scott having, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, it's still not a guarantee that his second spot will always be one of those 2 players. So I wanted to slow play it. This is 11 players start in your starting lineup per week. So I wanted to kind of approach this, and there's a lot more picks. So I don't want to give away the whole bag here. I would like to acquire more top 100 picks. But
if any of you guys are out there watching, and we know you are, Matt Berry. So
I wanted to kind of play this a little more passive and accrue more viable options than just top tier options. With it being best ball and deeper starting lineups, that's kind of the approach I wanted to take. So I mean, I think from Scott's angle, the stance, and just remove Scott from the equation, just say like, yeah, we're going to start with these 2 elite quarterbacks. The best ball kind of hurts it a little bit. Because for the reasons I said, I mean, now granted, it's going to be more weeks. He's going to have those 2 guys be in a starting lineup than not, but still not a guarantee. And you're talking about 2 guys you're sinking a lot of capital to and not only initial capital, but you're trading a 2021 pick. So if things go wrong for your team this year, you suffer some injuries, you're out, a first round pick. And maybe for me, that ends up being a better pick than I assumed it would be, even giving him 2 top 5 selections. But yeah, with it being a best ball, it hurts a little bit. And then quarterbacks just in general kind of being, devalued in a best ball just a little bit inherently. We talked about that in the open as well. You don't want to be in the front of the position. You can totally get by with 2 middle range options because you're going to fill that spot, a little bit more. Yeah, so it's kind of just where my approach was at. Just I mix and match approaches. I just am playing a league aggressively, so I kind of want to slow down a little bit and not just go hyper aggressive in another league, just because, you want to mix and match your strategies. But that's kind of where I approach this league. With it being best ball, deeper rosters, I want to inherently acquire as many top 100 picks as I can instead of just top 20 picks.
Yeah, you're the only team that hasn't made a selection yet in the draft. What kind of feedback did you get from Twitter since a guy like, Matt Berry tweeted out about it? What did you get people coming back at you like, you're an idiot? What the hell would you do that for? Or were people kind of like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here?
No, it was. I mean, he posted a poll and it was more in favor of Scott's side. But like I said, we had just made a similar trade inversely in another league, so it just makes me feel like, yeah, well, you might like this trade, but then that means you just like the trade I made in the other league too. So it's like it's okay with me. And anytime you're in fantasy football, like if you're going to acquire 2 studs, like that's always going to get you sway the vote. You know what I mean? If you get Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, the public's going to decide that. Like you said, I don't even have a player yet. Now, I will still be the first player. By the time pick 30 comes around, I'll have 3 players and no one else will.
Yeah, you have 3 of the next 7 picks in this draft.
So, I mean, I will still have 3 top 30 players. I just won't have 2 top 5 players like Scott does. And like I said, this is totally different than what Scott's usually approaches. I play in a lot of dynasty leagues with him, and he's usually more passive. So he gets to let his hair down a little bit too, like I did in the other league. Sometimes you just want to YOLO it. You want to just go studs and duds sometimes. I get to play in leagues with these guys, so I know I don't want to name these guys by names, but I know a lot of these guys, being in multiple leagues with them, how they're going to approach this, and I try to play off that a little bit too. And if you play in dynasty leagues, you should be keeping tabs on how your opponents play the game. If you're in 1 dynasty league or 10 dynasty leagues, you should be focusing on this guy traded his future first this year, and I've seen what he traded for. Like, he's willing to go for it, or these are the types of players he's drafting in rookie drafts. There's overlap in the type of players he's drafting in rookie drafts every year. You should keep tabs on that stuff because it's going to matter, because you might be on the clock in a rookie draft and you say, well, I know that this guy has gone for this type of player before. I might be able to move down a couple spots, acquire another pick. You should definitely be keeping tabs on how your opponents play the game of fantasy football as well as how you play. That's a big component as well.
Dwayne and I get real degenerate when it becomes draft season. And one of the tips that we've given over the years is even in your home redraft league with your buddies, go back through those drafts, look at who's drafting around you. And then if you can see, well, this guy likes taking a QB early, this is typically when this guy takes a tight end, because these guys in your home leagues, it doesn't change that much. Their philosophy is kind of always going to be the same. They're going to be the guy like, there's always that one guy, he's going to get a quarterback in the first 2 rounds. So know who that guy is. Absolutely. The Eagles just won the Super Bowl over my shoulder here, Dwayne. I don't know if you can see that right now.
I really don't want to hear anything else about the Eagles. I don't know.
Well, thank you so much. Rich Hribar at Lord Reeves on Twitter from sharpfootballanalysis.com joining us today. What a great hour and a half of good football talk, man. That was legit. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
No, thank you guys. Like I said, there's don't hedge your bet and act like, all these people are coming on your show or like we are important by any means. I mean, this is the brand you guys have built and, the voice you guys have, given to the people and, people want to be a part of it. They want to be associated with you, not inversely. So definitely take that. And, I said, you don't have to be so humble about it, to take that and run with it.
There you go. Like I said in the pre-show, Tan Mom is the guest next week. So get excited, everybody. But that'll do it this week for the Fantasy Football Hustle. For Rich Hribar, Dwayne McFarland, we appreciate it, folks. Give us a review on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, and I'll get off your back on Twitter. Stay safe out there, folks. Stay at home. Just hang out, listen to some podcasts, and support the fantasy community. Take it easy, guys. We'll see you next week.